All right, section 2.3, talking a little bit about slope. Most of this should be a review from your Algebra 1 and or your geometry class. The slope formula, m, is equal to y minus y over x minus x, would be used whenever you're finding the slope given 2 points. So you may have remembered in junior high that that would be rise over run. And the way you can remember this is if you're rising, you're going up or down. Well, those would be our y values, because on a graph, the y-axis goes up and down, and then the run is the left to right movement, and that would be in the x direction, or like the x-axis, going from left to right. So you need to remember that the y's are on the top. Now, the reason for these 1s and 2s is just that you do it in the same order. So if you pick from the first point in the y's, then you have to pick from the first point in the x's. It doesn't matter which order you do it in, but you have to be consistent between the top and the bottom. Now, if you're given a line, an equation of a line, like y equals mx plus b, we can see the slope. The slope is the m, just that number right there. So that means that to walk up the line, you would be up this many and then over the bottom number. So the top number again is the y's, the rise, and the bottom number would be the run or the x's. So it's up and then over. Now, if they give it to you in this standard form, you can also see the slope. A lot of kids would want to get this equal to y so that they could see the m right here. Now, very big confusion. This letter A is not that letter m. So the number in front of the x is not always the slope. It's only the slope if it's in this equation form. If it's in standard form, that number right there is not the slope. That is a big mistake that students make. If you wanted to, you could solve this for y. So if we were going to get y by itself, we would move the a to the other side, and then that would make it negative. So this formula right here, negative a, makes sense, because if you're moving it to the other side, you would change the sign. And then you would divide by b. So it makes sense that that b is on the bottom. So the way that I read this is the opposite of a over b. So the opposite of a over b is how you want to read that. Okay, so just some basic problems using slope. Find the slope of the line between the following points. So we're just going to use our slope formula of y minus y over x minus x. That's going to be slope. And it's equal to m because that's the letter they used for slope. So just plug that in for each problem. So I'm going to go 5 minus negative 3. So since I picked 5 first, I have to pick 4. 4 minus negative 8. A negative negative makes those positive, and you get 8 over 12. Now slope always has to be reduced, so just reduce your fraction. So m is equal to 2 over 3. Number 2. Do the same thing. Y minus y would be 5 minus negative 6 over 4 minus 4. And we get 11 over 0, which doesn't exist. So there isn't any slope here. So it does not exist. Sometimes some people would say there's no slope. Okay? So you want to say nothing here. You cannot divide by 0. In number 3, if you do that one, you get 2 minus 2 over 3 minus negative 4, or 0 over 7, and that is actually equal to 0. Now remember, 0 is a number, so that's just an answer. You don't go up any steps and over any steps, so you're not You're not having no slope, you're having zero slope. There's a difference between zero slope and no slope, okay? And so if you think about these points on a piece of graph paper, that might explain the difference. So in this orange one, we have the point 4, 5, let's say, and 4, -6. So this is the line we're talking about. So this one has no slope. The slope doesn't exist, which means you can't go up so many steps and then over no steps. All you can do is go up and down this line. So we say that the slope does not exist. Now the way that I always remember it is, can you walk on the line? If you can't walk on the line, then it doesn't have any slope. If you graph this one, 3, 2, and -4, 2, you would see that you get a flat horizontal line, and in this one, we say that it's flat. So the slope, it doesn't rise as you go across. So it goes up 0 steps as you go across the line. So that one has 0 slope. So again, I say that you have slope if you can walk on the line. And you're not Spider-Man. So you can't walk on this orange one, you would fall off. But this pink one you could walk on. Now if you go back to this blue one, you would ask yourself, can I walk on this line? Well, that would be 4, 5, so maybe this point, and -8, -3. Well, you would have this diagonal line, and I'd say, yeah, you could walk up that. It's just like a hill. So you could walk on that line. So for every 2 steps you go up, it takes you 3 steps across. That's what slope means. Right, you'll have to do some graphing problems with slope. Graph a line through the point 4, -2 with slope -2/3. So if the line's going to go through this point, we might as well put a dot right on that spot. So we would go 4, -2. And now, to get to another point on the line, we can use the slope. So you always need a point and slope, and then you can make your line, okay? So our slope is -2/3. Well, you could also write that as 2/3. So it doesn't matter where you put the negative, but one of the numbers has to be negative. So if we use it with the negative on top, that would say go down 2 to the right 3. So we would go down 2 to the right 3. And you could just keep doing that, down 2 to the right 3. Or you could do it this way, and you could go up 2 and to the left 3. Up 2 and to the left 3. So you want to make several steps using that slope and then draw your line. So a negative slope, you can see, goes up towards the left. All right, graph a line through the point 3, 2 with no slope. Now remember, it has no slope, which is the same thing as does not exist. So what kind of line has a slope that doesn't exist? The way we're going to remember that is we cannot walk on it. So Spider-Man, no Spider-Man. So where's the point you're going to start at? 3, 2. Now draw a line that you couldn't walk on. Well, that would be a vertical line. So we would just draw this vertical line. We have to know the difference between no slope and 0 slope. Other types of questions they'll ask you regarding slope is when they want to talk about parallel lines and perpendicular lines. Now remember, parallel lines from geometry are lines that never cross. So if you think about it, if you were on this line and you were walking, how would you be sure that you would never run into this guy who is walking? You would have to take the same steps. So for every step that you go up and go over, he has to take that same exact step, or wouldn't you eventually run into him? So we would know that parallel lines have the same slopes. Perpendicular lines, remember, are lines that form right angles. And a lot of times we use this perpendicular as a representation of the word perpendicular. So those slopes are opposite reciprocals. And so we need to remember opposite means different sign. So one's going to be positive and one's going to be negative. And reciprocal means that it's flipped over. So you need to make sure that you understand what those words mean, opposite reciprocal slopes. So if they give you, like example number 1, 2 equations, and they ask you if the lines are parallel or perpendicular, or maybe they're neither, which would mean that the lines are going to cross, but they would not cross at a right angle. Okay? So this would be they cross not at a right angle. So the two guys would run into each other. Well, what we need to know is we need to know the slopes. So in every one of these problems, we need to know the slope. Well, depending on what they give you, you could tell me the slope. So if you look at example number 1, these equations are in the form of y equals mx plus b. So can't you see the slope? The slope in this line, m is equal to 3, and in this one, m is also equal to 3. So we would say that these two lines are parallel because they have the same slope. In example number 2, we can tell in this top one, it's also y equals mx plus b. So in this one, m is equal to 2/3. But this bottom one is in standard form. So if you go back to the top of your notes, you'll remember that in standard form, m is equal to the opposite of a over b. So if we plug in what a is, and a is with the x, what's the opposite of a? -2 over b, which is -3. And a negative over a negative is the same as a positive over a positive. You can now see that these also have the same slope. So these lines are also parallel. So in these problems, you just want to make sure you know what the slope is. Okay, we will talk about the discrete and the continuous functions and do this word problem in class. So maybe you should try doing examples 3 and 4 before class tomorrow.